Understanding the distinction between an inquiry and an application is important for compliance with Regulation B because several requirements apply only to applications and not inquiries. Regulation B defines a loan application as an oral or written request for an extension of credit that is made in accordance with the procedures established by a creditor for the type of credit requested. The Federal Reserve staff interpretations of Regulation B further clarify that the phrase procedures established refers to the actual practices followed by a creditor for making credit decisions, as well as its stated application procedures. For example, if a creditor's stated policy is to require all applications to be in writing on the creditor's application form, but the creditor also makes credit decisions based on oral requests, the creditor's established procedures are to accept both oral and written applications. In other words, in some circumstances, informal inquiries, whether verbal or in writing, must be treated as an application pursuant to Regulation B. The next section of the interpretations describes one critical circumstance where an MLO may turn an oral inquiry into an application, even if the MLO's policy is to accept only written applications. A creditor is encouraged to provide consumers with information about loan terms. However, if in giving information to the consumer, the creditor also evaluates information about the applicant, decides to decline the request, and communicates this to the applicant, the creditor has treated the inquiry as an application and must then comply with the adverse action notification requirements under ECOA. Whether the inquiry becomes an application depends on how the creditor responds to the applicant, not on what the applicant says or asks. When an MLO verbally disqualifies a potential borrower, even on a legitimate underwriting basis, the MLO, according to Regulation B, is treating an inquiry as an application. While this is allowable under Regulation B, MLOs are obligated to follow certain notification and record-keeping requirements of Regulation B and Regulation C, which is the Federal Reserve's implementing regulation for the Home Mortgage Disclosure Act. These notification and record-keeping requirements apply only to applications and not inquiries. Therefore, if enough information has been collected to deny a loan and a denial has been communicated to the applicant, this interaction between an MLO and the prospective borrower is an application for the purposes of Regulation B. This is true regardless of the amount of information collected by the MLO's application procedures, fees paid to the MLO, whether the prospective applicant has identified a specific property or loan amount, or whether the communication is written or verbal. In some instances, the distinction between an inquiry and a denied application can be unclear. In recognition of MLO's confusion about Regulation B and pre-qualification programs, the Federal Reserve staff interpretations specifically state that whether a creditor must provide a notice of action taken for a pre-qualification or pre-approval request depends on the creditor's response to the request. For instance, a creditor may treat the request as an inquiry if the creditor provides general information such as loan terms and the maximum amount a consumer could borrow under various loan programs, explaining the process the consumer must follow to submit a mortgage application and the information the creditor will analyze in reaching a credit decision. On the other hand, a creditor has treated a request as an application and is subject to the adverse action notice requirements of the Equal Credit Opportunity Act. After evaluating information, the creditor decides that it will not approve the request and communicates that decision to the consumer. For example, if in reviewing a request for pre-qualification, a creditor tells the consumer that it would not approve an application for a mortgage because of a bankruptcy in the consumer's record, the creditor has denied an application for credit. We realize that this is a lot to take in, so we provide further examples of situations in which only an inquiry has taken place on the next page.